Papers in hand, Harrison marched into the dingy apartment, ready to sever ties with the Omega who broke his heart. He expected tears or anger. He never expected to find his estranged husband cornered by hitmen, shielding an enormous 8-month pregnant belly that carried his own flesh and blood. Heavy winter clouds hung low over Manhattan, casting a pallid grey light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Coal Syndicate's headquarters in the Chrysler Building. Harrison Cole stood by the glass, a tumbler of amber bourbon forgotten in his hand. At 32, Harrison was the undisputed head of the most ruthless Alpha-led organization on the eastern seaboard. He was a man built of cold calculation and raw dominant power, his presence alone enough to force lesser men to bare their throats in submission. Yet for the past 8 months, a hollow ache had gnawed at the edges of his sanity. The heavy mahogany door to his office clicked open, breaking the stifling silence. Gregory Finch Harrison's most trusted attorney and a sharp-minded beta stepped into the room. He carried a sleek leather briefcase, his expression carefully neutral. "We found him, sir." Gregory said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. Harrison's grip on the crystal glass tightened until his knuckles turned bone white. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. The mere mention of him, Theodore Ashcroft, was enough to send a spike of bitter, peppery cedar into the air, Harrison's own alpha pheromones reacting to the ghost of his estranged mate. "Where?" Harrison asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated in his chest. "Providence, Rhode Island." Gregory replied, extracting a thick manila envelope from his briefcase and setting it on the center of the sprawling obsidian desk. "A rundown tenement complex on Weybosset Street. The landlord is a slumlord who only takes cash. Theodore has been living under an alias, Thomas Abbott. He's been working the night shift at a local diner, keeping a remarkably low profile. The private investigators only caught his trail because he visited a free clinic 3 days ago under his real birth date." Harrison finally turned, his piercing grey eyes locking onto the manila envelope. Inside that folder were the divorce papers. The final legal severance of their bond. Their marriage had begun as an alliance. The Coles and the Ashcrofts had sought to control the lucrative underground shipping lanes stretching from Boston down to Miami via the I-95 corridor. Theodore, the beautiful, sharp-tongued Omega son of the Ashcroft patriarch, had been offered to Harrison to seal the treaty. But what was supposed to be a cold business transaction had ignited into a consuming, passionate bond. Theo was fierce, intelligent, and possessed a sweet scent of white tea and spun sugar that had easily bypassed all of Harrison's defenses. For 2 years they had been untouchable. Then came the betrayal. 8 months ago, a massive shipment of untraceable weaponry was intercepted at the Brooklyn Navy Yard by their fiercest rivals, the Sullivan family. Harrison lost 12 men that night. When his internal security team swept the network for the leak, the encrypted digital ledger detailing the exact routes and security protocols was traced directly to a private server hidden inside Theo's personal study. The memory still tasted like ash in Harrison's mouth. He remembered kicking the study door open, the overwhelming scent of betrayal, and Theo's wide, confused eyes. Theo had sworn his innocence, his voice cracking, as he begged Harrison to look deeper to find the real mole. But the evidence was damning, and Harrison's inner alpha, blinded by the perceived treachery of his own mate, had snapped. He had thrown a bag of clothes at Theo's feet and ordered him out. "Leave before I forget you were ever my mate. The Ashcroft alliance is dead." Theo had walked out into the freezing March rain with nothing but the clothes on his back. Harrison assumed the Omega would run back to his father. Instead, Theo had vanished completely. In the ensuing bloodbath, Harrison systematically dismantled the Ashcroft operations, absorbing their territory and burying anyone who stood in his way. But the victory brought no satisfaction, only an echoing cavernous silence in his penthouse, and a lingering scent on the bedsheets that drove him to the brink of madness. "Are the papers ready?" Harrison asked, striding toward the desk. "Fully drafted. They grant you full autonomy, severing any lingering legal or financial ties to the Ashcroft estate. Once he signs, he is a ghost to us." Gregory confirmed, tapping the envelope. "I can send a courier, or I can go myself." Harrison stared at the envelope. His alpha instincts were violently clawing at the walls of his mind, screaming at him to reject the separation. The mating bite on his neck, though, faded, burned with phantom heat. He needed closure. He needed to look Theodore in the eyes, one last time to see the Omega who had betrayed him, broken and defeated, so he could finally kill the pathetic yearning part of his soul that still loved him. "No," Harrison growled, picking up the heavy envelope. "Prepare my car. I'm going to Providence. I'm going to watch him sign this myself." The drive north was agonizingly slow, trapped inside the claustrophobic luxury of an armored Cadillac Escalade. The skyline of Manhattan faded into the grim industrial stretch of the Connecticut Highway, eventually giving way to the crumbling colonial architecture of Providence. By the time Harrison's driver pulled onto Weybosset Street, the sun had dipped below the horizon, plunging the neighborhood into deep, sketchy shadows. It was a miserable, forgotten sector of the city. Neon signs flickered angrily, buzzing like dying insects, and the gutters were choked with frozen slush and garbage. Harrison stepped out of the vehicle, the bitter December wind whipping his heavy wool overcoat. He motioned for his 2 armed guards to remain by the car. "Nobody comes up unless I call," Harrison ordered, his voice brooking no argument. He wanted this done quietly. One signature, and it would all be over. He entered the tenement building. The smell inside was atrocious, a mix of stale cigarette smoke, rotting wood, and cheap bleach. The elevator was boarded up, forcing him to take the narrow, uneven stairs to the 4th floor. Every step felt heavier than the last. He gripped the manila envelope so tightly, the edges crumpled. As Harrison reached the 4th floor landing, his enhanced alpha senses flared. He froze his hand, hovering over the custom Kimber 1911 holstered at his hip. Beneath the stench of the decaying building, a very specific scent was weaving through the freezing air. It was a scent that had haunted his dreams for 8 agonizing months. White tea and spun sugar. Theo. But it was wrong. The scent wasn't light and delicate like he remembered. It was unbelievably dense, practically suffocating in its richness. It smelled like warm, honey-crushed vanilla beans, and a heavy, overwhelming musk of milk. It was the distinct, unmistakable scent of an Omega, deeply entrenched in nesting instincts. And cutting sharply through that rich sweetness was the sour, acidic stench of pure, unadulterated terror. Theo was in distress. Harrison's heart slammed against his ribs. His pupils dilated the civilized mob boss, vanishing in an instant, replaced entirely by the primal possessive beast he kept locked away. He moved silently down the hallway, following the scent to the door of apartment 4B. The door was thin, cheap plywood, the deadbolt rattling loosely in its frame. From inside, Harrison heard the heavy, mocking laughter of 2 distinct alpha voices, not his men. "Did you really think you could hide in a dump like this, little prince?" A gruff, gravelly voice sneered. "Sullivan sends his regards. He wasn't too happy about the coal syndicate taking over the docks. Figured taking the last surviving Ashcroft as collateral might balance the scales." "Don't come any closer," Theo's voice. It was raspy, breathless, and filled with a desperate panic that made Harrison's blood run cold. "Feisty," a second voice chuckled darkly. "Boss just wants you. though he didn't mention you were carrying a bonus. Look at the size of you. Whose mutt is that? You picking up strays after Cole threw you out like trash? Don't touch me. Theo screamed, the sound accompanied by the clatter of a falling chair and the shattering of cheap ceramic. Harrison didn't think. The manila folder containing the divorce papers slipped from his grasp, fluttering uselessly to the filthy carpet. He reared back and drove his boot into the cheap door with the force of a battering ram. The wood splintered and exploded inward, the door tearing off its hinges and crashing into the small living room. Harrison stepped through the threshold, releasing a roar of pure dominant alpha pheromones that hit the room like a physical shockwave. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop the sheer, crushing weight of his dominance, forcing the two Sullivan hitmen to stagger backward, choking on the oppressive aura. But Harrison's eyes didn't track the threats first. His gaze snapped instantly to the corner of the cramped, pathetic kitchen. There, backed against the rusted radiator, was Theodore. He was wearing a faded, oversized grey sweatshirt, one of Harrison's old Harvard crew-neck sweaters that he must have stolen on the night he was exiled. The hem of the sweater was stretched taut, failing to completely cover the massive, heavy curve of his belly. Theo was incredibly, undeniably 8 months pregnant. His pale hands were wrapped fiercely around his stomach, a protective shield over his unborn pup. His face was gaunt with dark circles, bruising the skin under his beautiful amber eyes. But those eyes were currently wide, with absolute shock as he stared at the doorway. The scent of the pregnant Omega hit Harrison head-on, bypassing all logic and settling directly in his soul. It was his. The underlying scent of the pup wrapped inside Theo's womb carried the faint, peppery cedar signature of Harrison's own bloodline. For 8 months, he had punished this man. For 8 months, Theo had been living in squalor, alone, terrified, and carrying the heir to the Cole syndicate. "Cole!" one of the Sullivan thugs yelled, breaking the momentary paralysis. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a snub-nosed revolver. Harrison moved with lethal, terrifying speed. Before the thug could even raise the barrel, Harrison was on him. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it violently until a sickening snap echoed through the room. The gun dropped to the linoleum floor. Harrison didn't pause. He drove his elbow directly into the man's throat, crushing his windpipe in a single brutal strike. The man collapsed, gurgling and clutching his neck. The second hitman lunged with a switchblade, desperate to escape the enclosed space. Harrison sidestepped the sloppy thrust, his expression devoid of anything human. He grabbed the back of the man's head and smashed his face brutally against the edge of the granite countertop twice, until the man's body went completely limp, sliding to the floor in a heap of blood and shattered teeth. Silence descended on the apartment, broken only by the heavy, ragged breathing of the Alpha, standing amidst the carnage, and the terrified, whimpering pants of the Omega in the corner. Harrison stood slowly, his chest heaving. His knuckles were bruised, a few drops of the Sullivan men's blood splattered across the cuffs of his immaculate white dress shirt. He slowly turned his head to look at Theo. The anger, the betrayal, the empire, it all melted away into the cheap linoleum floor. "Theo," Harrison whispered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual command. He took a slow, hesitant step forward, his eyes glued to the massive swell of Theo's stomach. The fabric of the sweater shifted slightly, a visible kick protruding from the Omega's belly, reacting to the intense surge of its father's pheromones filling the room. Theo flinched violently, pressing his spine harder against the wall. Tears spilled over his eyelashes, cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. He curled his body inward, trying to hide the undeniable proof of their bond, releasing a high-pitched, distressed whine that physically hurt Harrison's chest. "No." Theo sobbed, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Don't take him. Please, Harrison. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll disappear again. Just don't take my baby." Harrison stopped dead in his tracks. The words felt like daggers plunging repeatedly into his ribs. "Don't take him." The sheer terror in his mate's eyes wasn't directed at the men bleeding out on the floor. It was directed at him. "You," Harrison choked out, falling heavily to his knees, right there in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and blood. The fearsome alpha, the untouchable boss of the coal syndicate, collapsed under the weight of his own monumental mistake. He looked up at the broken, beautiful Omega, his hands trembling as he reached out toward empty space. "You're carrying my pup, and you thought I would take him from you." Theo let out a broken sob, burying his face in his hands, unable to look at the man who had discarded him. "You cast me out, Harrison." Theo wept bitterly, his honeyed scent spiking with profound grief. "You threw me into the rain and told me to forget you. You don't get to claim us now." Outside in the hallway, the manila envelope containing the divorce papers slowly soaked up a puddle of blood, leaking from the doorway, the legal documents dissolving into nothing, just as Harrison's entire understanding of the world shattered around him. Harrison remained rooted to the blood-stained linoleum, his towering frame reduced to a posture of absolute submission. The fearsome reputation of the coal syndicate meant nothing in this cramped, rotting kitchen. All that mattered was the trembling Omega, huddled against the radiator, clutching a belly that held Harrison's unborn child. "I won't take him, Theo," Harrison murmured, his voice a gravelly broken whisper. He consciously suppressed his dominant cedar pheromones, forcing his scent to soften into something warm, grounding, and protective. A deliberate blanket of calm, meant to soothe the frantic Omega. "I swear on my life, I won't touch him, and I won't hurt you. You have my word." Theo's amber eyes flickered with a raw, agonizing mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. His breath hitched as another sharp, distressed whine tore from his throat. He looked at the bodies on the floor, then back at Harrison, his hands never leaving the protective cradle of his stomach. "You didn't believe me." Theo wept the words, barely audible over the rattling of the ancient radiator. "You looked at me like I was a monster. You let me walk out into the cold. I was a fool," Harrison confessed, the admission tasting like bile. "A blind, arrogant fool. I was so consumed by the betrayal that I didn't see the truth standing right in front of me. I am so sorry, Theodore. God, I am so completely sorry." Harrison slowly reached up and unbuttoned his heavy cashmere overcoat. He shrugged it off and held it out an offering. Slowly giving the Omega every opportunity to pull away, he crawled forward. When Theo didn't flinch, Harrison gently draped the warm coat over Theo's shaking shoulders, enveloping him in the lingering, comforting scent of his alpha. At that exact moment, heavy boots thundered up the staircase. Harrison's two armed guards burst through the shattered doorway, their weapons drawn. "Boss!" The lead guard, Dominic, shouted, his eyes sweeping the carnage. Theo screamed, pressing himself frantically into the corner, his breathing turning into rapid, shallow gasps. "Weapons down!" Harrison roared, twisting his head to glare at his men with lethal intensity. "Put them away now, and get a medical transport team here immediately. Clear the perimeter." "Harrison!" Theo suddenly gasped, his face draining of all remaining color. His fingers dug viciously into the sleeve of Harrison's shirt. "Harrison, something is wrong." Harrison turned back, his heart stopping. A dark, wet stain was spreading across the worn knees of Theo's sweatpants. The intense terror, the physical shock of the attack, and the sudden overwhelming surge of Harrison's pheromones had been too much. "My water!" Theo choked out a sudden, violent contraction, ripping through his body. He doubled over with a guttural cry, his forehead resting against Harrison's chest. "It's too early. He's not ready. Please, Harrison, save him. Dominic, bring the Escalade to the front door. Right fucking now! Harrison bellowed, scooping Theo into his arms. The Omega was frighteningly light, save for the heavy, precious weight of their pup. Call Mount Sinai in New York. Tell Dr. Jonathan Hayes to prepare the private maternity wing. We are coming in hot. The drive south was a blur of flashing hazard lights, screaming engines, and pure, unfiltered panic. Harrison sat in the spacious back seat of the SUV, holding Theo tightly against his chest, murmuring frantic, soothing praises into his mate's damp hair. Theo writhed in agony, his contractions hitting with merciless speed. The metallic scent of blood and amniotic fluid mingled with the sour tang of distress, driving Harrison's alpha instincts into a frenzy. As they tore down I-95 crossing the state line, a cold, calculated realization began to pierce through the fog of Harrison's panic. How did the Sullivans know Harrison's eyes narrowed in the darkness of the cabin? Theo had been living off the grid for 8 months. The private investigators had only found him 3 days ago. Gregory Finch had only handed Harrison the file with the Providence address 2 hours before Harrison left Manhattan. The Sullivans hadn't stumbled upon Theo. They were tipped off, and the only person who had the address, the only person who handled the encrypted ledgers that framed Theo 8 months ago, was Gregory Finch. "Dominic," Harrison said quietly, his voice a lethal icy blade, cutting through the tense silence of the SUV. He stared out the window at the dark highway, holding his crying mate closer. "Call our internal security team. I want a full, discreet audit of Gregory Finch's offshore accounts. Look for any wire transfers from Sullivan shell companies. And tell Gregory to meet me at Mount Sinai. Tell him I need him to bring the final draft of the divorce papers." The sterile, blindingly white corridors of Mount Sinai's private wing were a stark contrast to the blood-soaked squalor of the Providence apartment. Theo had been rushed straight into an emergency delivery suite hooked up to fetal monitors and a Pitocin drip to help regulate the chaotic premature contractions. Harrison paced the waiting room like a caged panther. His white shirt was ruined, stained with the blood of his enemies and the tears of his mate. The heavy oak doors to the wing opened, and Gregory Finch stepped through his impeccably tailored suit, unwrinkled, clutching a sleek leather briefcase. "Harrison," Gregory said, pasting on a look of grave concern. "I came as quickly as I could. Dominic said there was a complication. Did Theodore sign the papers?" Harrison stopped pacing. He looked at the beta lawyer, the man who had stood by his right hand for 5 years. He saw the subtle twitch at the corner of Gregory's mouth, the faint, nearly imperceptible scent of nervous sweat masking his expensive cologne. "No," Harrison said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He walked slowly toward Gregory, locking the double doors of the waiting room with a heavy click. He didn't have time. Sullivan's men were already there. They were going to kidnap him. Gregory blinked, feigning shock perfectly. "My God, how did the Sullivans find him?" "That is exactly what I was wondering," Harrison whispered, stepping into Gregory's personal space. "Since you were the only one who possessed that address, just like you were the only one who had administrative access to the digital ledgers that framed my husband 8 months ago." Gregory's eyes widened, his composure cracking. "Harrison, be reasonable. I have been loyal to the Cole family for—" Harrison moved faster than a striking snake. His hand shot out, wrapping around Gregory's throat and slamming the lawyer violently against the reinforced glass window. The briefcase clattered to the floor, bursting open. "Dominic audited your offshore accounts while I was in the car." Harrison snarled, his alpha aura exploding into the room, suffocating and lethal. $3 million, Gregory, funneled from Sullivan Shell Corporations into your private Cayman's account, exactly 1 week before the weapon shipment was ambushed. You embezzled from me, you sold my men out to the Sullivans. And when Theo started looking into the financial discrepancies, you planted the evidence on his server to frame him. Gregory clawed at Harrison's hand, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "Harrison, please. You cost me 8 months with my mate." Harrison growled, his grip tightening until the cartilage in Gregory's neck creaked. "You forced my pregnant husband to live in freezing squalor. You nearly got my unborn pup killed tonight." Harrison didn't shout. He didn't need to. The quiet promise of violence was far more terrifying. He released Gregory, letting the gasping, choking man collapse to his knees. "Take him to the Brooklyn warehouse," Harrison commanded the 2 guards standing outside the glass doors, who immediately stepped in to drag the sobbing lawyer away. "Keep him alive until I get there. He is going to beg for a quick death." Before Harrison could process the betrayal, the delivery room doors swung open. Dr. Hayes emerged, his surgical mask pulled down. "Mr. Cole," the doctor said urgently. "He's fully dilated. The stress of the attack pushed him over the edge, but the baby's heart rate is strong. He's asking for you. He's panicking, and we can't calm him down without his alpha." Harrison didn't hesitate. He burst into the delivery room, the harsh fluorescent lights illuminating Theo, who was pale, covered in sweat, and thrashing against the hospital bed rails. "Harrison!" Theo cried out, his voice hoarse, reaching his trembling hands out into the empty air. I'm here, sweetheart." Harrison rushed to the bedside, capturing Theo's hands and pressing desperate, frantic kisses to his knuckles, his wrists, his forehead. He unleashed his cedar scent, entirely flooding the sterile room with the heavy, protective aroma of a bonded mate. Theo leaned into the scent, a sob of relief tearing through him. "Don't leave me, please. Never again. I am never letting you go." Harrison vowed, tears finally spilling from his cold grey eyes, tracing tracks down his own exhausted face. "I know everything, Theo. I know it was Gregory. I know you were innocent. I am so sorry. I love you. Please just breathe for me. Let's bring our pup into the world." The next hour was a grueling, agonizing test of endurance. Harrison stood by Theo's head, letting the Omega crush the bones in his hand, with every contraction, whispering words of endless devotion and apologies into his ear. He anchored his mate, sharing his strength through the shattered, slowly mending fragments of their bond. "One more push, Theodore," Dr. Hayes encouraged. "You're doing brilliantly." With a final ear-splitting cry that echoed with all the pain, betrayal, and love of the past year, Theo pushed. The room fell deadly silent for one agonizing second, and then the sharp, beautiful, piercing wail of a newborn filled the air. Harrison collapsed against the edge of the bed, burying his face in the crook of Theo's neck, weeping openly. The tough, unyielding boss of the Cole Syndicate cried like a child. A boy. "Doctor," Hayes announced with a warm smile, quickly cleaning the squalling infant, before wrapping him in a soft, heated blanket. "He's small, but he's perfectly healthy, Mr. Cole." The nurse gently placed the tightly swaddled bundle onto Theo's exhausted, heaving chest. Theo let out a breathless, watery laugh, his shaking fingers tracing the incredibly soft, downy hair on the baby's head. The pup immediately stopped crying, rooting toward his mother's scent, radiating a tiny, perfect blend of vanilla milk and peppery cedar. Harrison leaned over his heart, swelling to the point of bursting as he looked down at his son. He gently brushed his thumb against the baby's microscopic cheek. "He's beautiful," Harrison whispered reverently, looking up to meet Theo's tear-filled amber eyes. "He looks just like you," Theo sniffled, leaning his head back against the pillows, a weak but genuine smile gracing his lips for the first time in nearly a year. "He has your scowl, Alpha." Harrison smiled, pressing a long, tender kiss to Theo's sweat-dampened forehead. "Theo, I know I don't deserve it. I know I have a lifetime of making up to do. But please let me bring you home. Let me protect you both. I will burn the world down before I ever doubt you again." Theo looked at the man who had broken his heart, and then down at the beautiful little boy they had created together. The road to forgiveness would be long filled with shadows and scars, but as Harrison's warm, protective cedar scent wrapped securely around them, both, Theo knew they were finally safe. "Take us home, Harrison," Theo whispered softly, closing his eyes. "Take us home." Did the intense twists and emotional reconciliation of Harrison and Theo keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this dramatic Omegaverse Mafia romance, please hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow drama lovers and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, heart-pounding audio stories just like this one. Leave a comment below with your favorite moment.